Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content.
In a dark, uncharted swamp, a lone boat quietly glides along through the black waters. Somewhere in the darkness of the moonless night, there is a familiar growl, the low rumble of a saltwater crocodile. A big one from the sound of it. The small wooden boat oars forward a bit. There is a man standing on the prow, his muscular body crouched expectantly, poised like a cat about to strike. In one hand, he holds a searchlight, sweeping the waters for the source of the sound. On his belt hangs a 12-inch Bowie knife secured in a leather sheath. The light scans the darkness for the source of the sound. Two massive yellow-green eyes with vertical slit pupils gleaming eerily in the glow of the searchlight. It's even bigger than he was expecting. The man in the boat inches the small craft forward, slowly, until it comes up alongside this massive prehistoric beast. He steels himself, prepares, and leaps into the water. With a huge splash, he crashes onto the beast's back. The 17-foot behemoth thrashes and fights, spinning into a death spiral to try and drown its assailant. There's a fight, a struggle, but the man prevails. He locks his legs around the creature's armored scales, throws a rope around its muzzle, yanks on it, and locks the crocodile's mouth shut. Still illuminated by the searchlight, in the midst of a fight for survival against an apex predator twice his size, the man turns his head towards the boat. There is a small home video recorder propped up along the bow. It's pointing in his direction. The man finds the red light, looks at it, and smiles broadly. Crikey, isn't she a beaut?
Hello, and welcome back to Badass of the Week. My name is Ben Thompson, and I am here with our producer, Andrew Jacobs. Andrew, how are you doing today?
I am good. I'm good. Excited. We're finishing out the year.
Yeah.
You know, we had Thanksgiving, and now we have it feels like 2 days before Christmas.
Yes. This is like a wild time for me because my wife and my son are both born like the same week of November, like right before Thanksgiving. So it was like my wife's birthday, my son's birthday. They had parties that were on different days. Then Thanksgiving. Then I got sick and I was supposed to record last week and I couldn't even talk. My voice was totally gone. I was just going to have to whisper the entire podcast, which was just going to be real awkward.
We need the grumbly, I don't know if you've seen Yellowstone, Kevin Costner.
Oh, yeah.
In that show. It's just always like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, this was not that. This was not like the awesome Tom Waits voice that you get when you're sick. This was like, and then it was going to be real weird to be to do a whole podcast whispering a badass stuff.
There are people into that.
He took out 27 bad guys.
That is a whole thing. That's a whole thing. There are people very into whispering
badass ASMR. Yeah, that was what we were gonna get. It was gonna be real weird.
Yeah, we could do a bonus episode. See if attract a whole new audience.
Calmly explain horrible mutilations and decapitation.
Yes.
Then they pulled his lungs out through his back. It's called Blood Eagle. But actually, this week we're not talking about horrible carnage and mutilations. We are talking about someone who was largely nonviolent, almost entirely nonviolent, and a guy who I was gonna make a joke because you were I'm really excited to be here, Ben, and we're being real whispery and calm, but the guy we're talking about today was not calm. Or he was excited about everything all the time in the most bombastic possible way that was just absolutely infectious. So we have talked about the continent of Australia. We did an episode together where you and me went through all of the different wild creatures and plants and animals on that continent.
That was a fun one.
Kill you, yes. But they were all tamed by a man named Steve Irwin, also known as the Crocodile Hunter. November 15th was Steve Irwin Day. We're recording this in early December, so we just barely missed it. But there's never a bad time to talk about the Crocodile Hunter. So
yeah, no, I'm excited. You said he doesn't have any weapons or anything, is what you said this way. I'm like, I feel like he had a stick that he used a lot.
He had a stick. He had a net.
Snakes.
Yeah, he had a stick. He had a net. He would in some of the early episodes, he had like a knife strapped to him in case he needed it. But he was a nonviolent guy. I remember there was one clip of him where he was wrestling with he was trying to relocate a gator. It was at the zoo where he worked, and he was trying to move a gator into a different pen, and he had to trap it. And he did that in a very Steve Irwin way, which was by jumping onto the back of it and trying to tie it. He got its snout tied up with a rope, and he was kind of wrestling with it. And this gator is I guess it's a croc, but it's
crocodile,
17 feet long, weighs a ton, right? Literally weighs a ton.
It's like, crikey, this thing is giant.
Yeah, and he's wrestling with it, and it's trying to kill him with its tail and trying to bite him and all this stuff. And while it's fighting him, and he's fighting for his life, it bumps its head. It bonks its head against a rock. And he's like, oh no, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That was my fault. Oh, that probably really hurt. It's got a little blood coming out of its mouth. I was like, this thing is trying to kill you, dude. That's how nonviolent he was. He felt legitimately seemed to feel very bad about this alligator bumping its head on a rock while trying to bite him.
Yeah. So wait, when did you first discover the Crocodile Hunter?
So I guess I feel like everybody who's seen the show has the first time they watched it and was like, what in the world? And we're watching, what the hell is this, right? For me, I was in my house where I grew up, and I could hear my brother and my dad making noise in the living room. And I was walking around doing my own thing. And I walked behind the couch, and they were there was a guy on TV. He had this blonde mullet. He had shorts and work boots and a khaki adventuring shirt, and he's holding this snake by its tail. He's clearly in the wilderness of Australia. He's holding a snake by its tail, and it's trying to bite him. It's thrashing around trying to bite him, and the snake is longer than him. So even though he's holding it at a full arm's length, it's still coming very close to him, and he's holding it into the camera and towards himself, and he's like, wow, this is a king brown snake. It's the most venomous snake in Australia. It'll kill you within 5 minutes if you get bit by it. And it's snapping at him, and he's talking to the camera. He's not even looking at the thing, and then it comes out and it bites him on his boot. And he's like, oh, good thing it bit me on the boot. It's never going to its fangs aren't big enough to get through the soles of my rubber boots. And I was just like, what the hell are you guys watching? And my dad was like, oh, this is Crocodile Hunter. This guy's nuts. And then I was just like, well, I don't remember what I was doing, but I'm going to sit down and watch the rest of this because this is weird. I've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, I feel like I probably first came across him on a late night show. He's probably on Conan or Letterman or something, doing his thing and scaring the hell out of the hosts with something ridiculous. He
dressed Conan up in a crocodile outfit and wrestled him one time. It was here's how I'd put a tracker on Conan. And he just brought him down. And Conan is big. Conan's 6'6" or something. Crocodile Hunter was not that big. He was a lot shorter than Conan, but he got him on the ground and got him in that whatever, that full Nelson that he puts the crocodiles in. Yeah.
But here's what I'll say though. Outside of, his personality and the images in my head of him doing the in the work boots and the adventuring shirt and the blonde mullet and occasionally jumping on a crocodile or a snake, I don't actually know that much about his story.
It's super interesting.
I'm excited to hear sort of, Crocodile Hunter origins.
Yes. Yeah. His story is wild. He, the version you see on TV is who this guy is, right? He's very different from a lot of TV personalities in that, they don't turn the camera off and he's like, oh, long day at the office today. He's just always like this. And he lived this life for, his entire existence was doing this sort of thing you see him do on TV. He was doing this when the cameras were off. It wasn't a bit that he was doing to get attention. So let's get into it. So let's take a really quick ad break. And when we come back, we are going to talk about Crocodile Hunter origins. So please stick with us. Steve Irwin was born February 22nd, 1962, in a little town in Queensland, Australia called Fern Tree Gully. He used to put it as like he was hatched up against a rock in Fern Tree Gully, which there's a lot of Crocodile Hunter expressions that are going to come up in the episode today. I am not going to attempt an Australian accent. That's a thing that I'm not good at is accents. I'm not going to do it. But
you can say, I think the only thing I can do is say Crikey.
Crikey.
That's about it.
Yeah. So that's I'm going to try to not do it just to like not, force cringes out of our Australian listeners. But sometimes it's like, this guy's energy was so infectious that like you can't not be like, oh, isn't that a beauty? I saw a thing like they did an interview on him for 60 Minutes Australia, and they were like, he might not be the most famous Australian in the world. You've got like a Mel Gibson or a Russell Crowe, but he's the most famous Australian in the world who uses an Australian accent on screen.
That's good. I like that.
Doesn't put on a fake American accent to become a movie star. Okay. So Steve's dad is an interesting guy. He's named Bob Irwin. He was originally a plumber in Melbourne, which is like a big city that's like the capital of Australia. So he was a successful plumber in a big city, and but he loved reptiles. He was a herpetologist, a naturalist, and at some point, Bob Irwin had made enough money from his plumbing business that he bought 4 acres of land in Queensland, which is like, I don't know, maybe it's the Florida of Australia. It's like more rural. It's more out in the bush, right? So he buys some land out in kind of the middle of nowhere in Queensland, and he opens it as a conservation park in 1970. He loves reptiles, so he starts collecting reptiles and putting them into this little conservation park. He puts all of his money into this, building this basically a proto zoo, to the point where he's living in an RV on site because he doesn't have like a place to live. And he's not doing what a lot of zoos do and like buying the animals. He's like going into the wilderness, finding crocodiles, lizards, snakes, things like that, capturing them, bringing them into his zoo, and like, his expenses are kind of building the enclosures for the animals.
Sure. So he's catching. That's one way to save some money, I suppose.
Yeah, go catch the thing by hand. Yeah. Put it in there. Here's a conservation park for Queensland wildlife because I caught it in Queensland and I brought it here and set it up. So he marries a nurse named Lynn, and they start working together on this conservation park. Bob Irwin develops a lot of trapping techniques for capturing animals, I think just through trial and error, I guess. But, Steve is born in 1962, so he's 8 when the conservation park is opened. Steve Irwin, he loves his dad. He wants to grow up to be just like him. He's going on some of these adventures with him to catch wildlife to bring to the zoo. And so he's part of, first it's like koalas, and then it upgrades to like snakes, reptiles, non-venomous, then crocodiles, all this other stuff, right? So Steve says that at age 9 was the first time he jumped onto a crocodile's back.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe it was closer down towards the tail than the head. Maybe his dad was holding the head and he was holding the tail. But and maybe it wasn't a huge crocodile. He defines big crocodiles as being like 6 feet or bigger, which is bigger than him, right? I think I don't know if he was 6 feet tall. It was about that, right? And so so at 9 he jumps on his first crocodile. For his 6th birthday, he got a 12-foot python as a present for his birthday. That was what he wanted for his birthday, so he got a 12-foot python.
No one tell my kids about any of this.
Yeah. Well, maybe you could, because at some point when he was a kid, some point when he was, I think, a teenager, one of his jobs was to shovel poop at the zoo, and he went into a python enclosure to scoop its poop with this big shovel, and it was a 24-foot man-eating python. and it has a strike range of like
sizable.
Yeah,
is what you're saying.
Yeah,
24 feet.
24
not bad.
feet. That's a city bus.
That's like an
right?
RV.
That's the length of a bus. Yeah. He went in to clean its poop, which he did every day, but this time the snake got mad. It had a 6-foot strike range, and it striked at him, and it wrapped him up and wound around him and was squeezing him. He had the shovel up in front of him, and that was creating like a little bit of a gap so that he wasn't choking to death. But like every time he breathed in, the thing would constrict around him and constrict him tighter, and he couldn't breathe. He couldn't really yell out. He's there by himself. He manages to stand up and tries to like walk out of the enclosure to get help. But the thing like gets its tail around his legs and trips him. So now he's completely wrapped up with the coil of this 24-foot python. He's trying to yell. His mom's around, but she doesn't. She hears me. He's like, "Mom," and he's like, blood is like starting to come out of his eyes and his mouth and his ears. And she doesn't realize that it's that big of a deal. And she's like, "Oh yeah, no, I'll be there in a second, honey." And then when she finally gets there, she has to Lynn Irwin has to grab that 24-foot python by its tail and unwrap him. And that was it. He was dying. Like he had seconds to live probably by the time she uncoiled that.
So one of these days we need to make a video podcast, because you see my face as you're telling me this. It's just like, what the heck?
Yeah. And so that's, he's a teenager. He's not an adult when this happens to him. And so just wild stuff. And then later on, like he never was scared of snakes. Like that's the sort of thing where I'd be like, okay, well, never going in that enclosure again. But like,
so he had the opposite of the Indiana Jones experience.
Yeah.
Like Indy falls into the snake, into the train with the snakes, and he's like, oh, now he hates snakes after that. And Steve here is like almost killed by a snake, and he's like, well, I'm good now.
This is the thing for him. Like every time you see him almost die on the show, even, he's just like, look at how amazing this thing is. And that was his takeaway when he's telling the story, was not like, oh yeah, that's the time a snake almost killed me. But his personality is more like, this is how amazing snakes are. This thing was crazy. You can't believe how strong and how fast this thing was. It was amazing.
It makes me wonder what Steve didn't like, or what scared Steve,
He didn't like parrots.
Parrots?
He would capture any kind of animal, but he was like, I don't like parrots because for some reason parrots hate me. He's like, you think they're cute. And you're like, oh, you try to get it to talk, and you get it, but as soon as you put your face close to it, it bites you. So he had some big scar on his nose from some cockatoo that he was trying to talk to, and it bit him on the nose and pierced it, gave him a nose piercing, like a bull,
screw you,
right?
Steve.
Yeah, it went through his nose like a piercing on a bull, and he's got a scar that's still there. And he was like, no, I don't have a nose piercing. Like this cockatoo attacked me. He's like, and parrots attacked me. So he's like, I don't touch parrots. I don't go near them. I don't like them.
We might have to name this episode Steve Irwin, Crocodile Hunter, and Parrot Hater.
Yeah, that was the thing. I didn't like parrots.
Would have never guessed. I like that. Okay.
The only other thing he said he didn't like was coffee. He said he tried coffee one time and he thought his head was going to explode. He was like, you can't give me coffee. I'll shoot off to the moon.
Oh, he was high on life.
Yes, he's like, I'm high on adrenaline all the time.
All right.
Okay, so, he turns 18, 19, and he decides that he's going to find work. He's been working at the zoo his whole life. He wants to get out and do something. So, of course, being the crocodile hunter, he volunteers to work for the Queensland East Coast Crocodile Management Program, which Queensland is the kind of state that has a government facility like that. He goes to work for them. And what that means for him is that he goes out into the boonies of Queensland and just basically lives out of a pickup truck or a tent, like Tarzan, for years. And his job is that when man-eating crocodiles go into inhabited areas, they call him and he'd go out there and capture it and bring it out into the wilderness and let it go. He doesn't want to kill these things. And, that's a kind of a thing that feels very strongly about is you don't just shoot that alligator in your backyard. You capture it, you bring it out into the wild, because these things are it's wildlife. It's important. We're kind of in its territory as much as it's in ours. We can all live together. Mm-hmm. Let's do that. And so, I grew up in Florida, so this is not that weird for me. Like, I've had an alligator in my swimming pool before, and I've had to call animal control to come take the alligator out of my swimming pool. But this was what he did for a living with crocodiles twice the size of the alligator that was in my swimming pool. And he kind of lived out in the wilderness like Tarzan, and he would go capture, hundreds of crocodiles of varying sizes and put them back into the wilderness. And he was living by himself for so long. What he started doing was he bought a home video camera, like a camcorder, like a VCR camcorder, and if he was going to capture a crocodile, he'd stick it in a tree. He didn't have a tripod, so he would like put it on the truck bed of his truck, or stick it in a tree, or if somebody was there with him, he'd have them hold it, and then he'd talk to the camcorder like, "Hey, check it out, we got this big thing. I'm gonna jump on it. Watch this." And then, and that's what he would do. So like he would record himself talking into the camera about what he was about to do. Just I think as like I live by myself. I have not much else to do, right? Like, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna record myself doing this cool thing, and he would he'd wear a tank top and he'd have a Bowie knife strapped to his legs, and he'd jump on man-eating crocodiles or venomous snakes and rope their jaws shut and manhandle them into an alligator trap or a net, throw them on the back of his truck, drive him back to camp, and or back into his boat. Like he'd jump off of boats onto the alligators if they were in the water.
He would have been huge on TikTok.
Yes, absolutely. That is exactly
the 2024 version of him is a cell phone in a tree.
Exactly. Doing a selfie of himself. He would hold the camera in one hand sometimes. If he didn't have somebody, he would hold the camera in one hand and like get it right up close to the alligator's mouth. I'm going to use alligator and crocodile synonymously in this episode. Just I know that they're different. Yeah. I know a saltwater crocodile lives in saltwater and it's bigger and it has more teeth. And the teeth point up. I can identify them, but I grew up with alligators so much that I'm going to refer to them as alligators by accident more than once, and I already have done that. I'm just going to caveat that right now is that I am going to use these words interchangeably because my experience growing up was alligators. Anyway, he'll get a camcorder in one hand and he'll go up there and he'll put it like in the croc's mouth, like, "Oh, look at this, and then he'll try to get himself in the shot too, like, look at how close I am to the crocodile's head." And he's just making these for himself. He's not posting these on TikTok or anything, right? Like he's not submitting these to America's Funniest Home Videos or anything.
Yeah.
He's just making them for himself. Anyway, in 1991, he's 29 years old, and his dad hands him the keys to the zoo. Like, "You're going to take over. I'm getting old now. I'm going to retire. You're in charge now." And so what Steve starts doing, he moves back to the zoo and he starts doing live demonstrations. It used to be like a reptile conservation area. Now it's called the Australia Zoo. And, it's mostly reptiles. They have some other stuff in there now too. But a lot of the crocodiles and other animals that Steve was capturing when he was living by himself, sometimes instead of relocating them to the wilderness, he put them in the zoo. He brought them back to the Australia Zoo. And so now a lot of these creatures that are here are creatures that he captured himself, which is cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he, does like a zoo demonstration like you'd see if you went to your local zoo, where they have the headset and they're talking like, and here's here's the crocodile, here's what it eats, and blah, blah, blah. And you see that at zoos all the time. But, a lot of times, the crocodile is underwater and you don't really see it. Like, if we could see him, you could kind of see his head over there, blah, blah, blah. Steve Irwin would get out there and he would like pick the thing up and like be like, "Look at this thing." And it would be trying to bite him and stuff. And he'd be throwing food in its mouth. And he would just had his, this kind of the proto Crocodile Hunter show. He would get out there and be like, "All right, check this out. We're going to feed it. Where is he? Oh, I think he's here." And then the thing would like jump up out of the water and try to bite him. And he'd be like, "Whoa, that was close. If that thing had bit me, I'd be a goner." And
yeah.
People were just like, "You got to go." It became
Sounds fun.
It became this regional attraction. Like, you got to go. You got to see this guy because he's crazy. And he gets out there and the snake's trying to bite him. And he's talking to us about how cool the snake is. Like, she's a beauty. And this thing's like, it's like, with one bite of this, I'd be dead in a heartbeat. And, but people love his personality. They love what he's doing. They're fascinated by him, whether it's, that they want to learn more about animals or they're just wondering if this guy's going to, get himself in trouble. Right.
Yeah. You're kind of waiting to see if there's going to be disaster.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
And, But he becomes this kind of star attraction at the zoo. This is around the time he meets his wife. So his wife, her name is Terry, and she comes to visit in 1991. She's like driving down some road in Queensland, and she sees this little tiny sign for the Australia Zoo. She's like, I'll go check it out. She goes and checks it out. She sees his demonstration. They're married within a year, and then she
sees the blonde mullet and just can't help herself.
She's just like, I gotta know more about this guy. This is fascinating. I've gotta know more. And so they get married in 92, and their honeymoon, he's got that VHS recorder, and he's recording them jumping on crocodiles in the wilderness. He's teaching her how to jump on alligators or crocodiles. And she's from Oregon, right? There's not a lot of crocs in Oregon, but
not too many.
But this becomes her life for the foreseeable future. Driving around the bush of the Australian bush, jumping on crocodiles and watching her husband almost get bit by poisonous lizards and stuff.
You never know where life will take you, folks.
Yes. One moment you're on a trip with your friends in Australia. The next moment you live there.
Yeah.
You're on TV in Australia with the most famous Australian in the world. Okay, so his shows start getting successful. He starts becoming more of a well-known thing. And then at one point, the Discovery Channel approaches him about doing a TV show. And that is where you get the Crocodile Hunter. That is the first season of the Crocodile Hunter. They're like, this guy, we've been hearing about him. We want to go. Maybe they go to check him out, and they're like, you need your own show. Like, this is crazy. And so, it's a lot of what he's basically been training his whole life for since he was 9. He jumped on his first crocodile. And he's been recording himself since then. And now he's getting the chance to do it for a much bigger audience. And he just kind of kicks everything that he was doing up to 11 and is propelled into this international celebrity. So we're going to take a really quick break. And when we get back, we're going to talk about the Crocodile Hunter and what happens after he becomes, the most famous Australian on Earth. So please stick with us. Okay, so Steve Irwin becomes the Crocodile Hunter at this point in his story, and the show is a huge hit. He's got this personality that people love. The show is not like anything you've ever seen. He's getting up in the camera. He's trying to hold the creature, whatever he's talking about, even if it's like a deadly spider, he's holding it really close to his face, and he's right in the middle of the lens. Like, check this out, this thing's so cool. Show us your fangs. And it's like, this is a black widow spider. What are you doing, you maniac? But people are crazy for it.
Just a little pet.
Yeah. He's like, this is an amazing creature, blah, blah, blah. And, people go crazy for it. They go crazy for him. The show's on for 5 seasons. It's aired in 130 countries. They make a movie out of it. He becomes like the face of Australia. Like, they put him literally they put him on promotional material for visiting for the Australia Tourism Bureau, right? And and he's here, and he's, like you said, he was doing late night stuff. He puts a Komodo dragon on Jay Leno's desk, right? He goes on Conan, and like they attack a rubber crocodile in the kiddie wading pool together. Like, he teaches him how to do the crocodile wrestling, so he jumps on him, and then he's just getting soaking wet. And there's
delightful.
I think there was one where I feel like I saw him on Oprah once. I couldn't find this clip when I was going through for my research, but I feel like he was on Oprah or something like that. And she was like, she interviews him, and then she's like, oh, and check this out. And they had kind of a similar setup where there was a crocodile in a plastic crocodile in a blow up pool toy in a kiddie pool, and she didn't even like lead into it. She was like, oh, and then look what we have over here. And he was like, stay back. And he like ran and jumped on it, like, and started wrestling.
I think I was hoping you would say that she'd be like, all right, everyone look under your chairs. Black widows.
You get a poisonous spider. You get a venomous spider. Yeah, I mean, and that's it. He's going on these shows, and it's really creating more awareness for him. He did a This Is Sports Center commercial where he tackles the Florida Gator, Terry the Gator. Yeah. He was on a FedEx commercial where like he pretends he got bit by that same king brown snake, and he's like, oh, it turns out the anti-venom was not sent via FedEx, and then he pretends to die, right?
Funny because I always picture his outfit is a little bit more UPS, but
Yeah, that's true, huh? Gotta pay the bills.
Yeah.
He was in the Macy's parade. They put him in the Macy's parade.
Oh, wow.
He said he was really surprised because some girl flashed him. he was like, you don't really usually see that at the Macy's parade.
Come on.
It was like, it's cold.
Wow.
It was cold. It was too cold for that. But yeah, he has this personality and this thing where you get in the camera's face, and he does get injured. Like you said, some people were watching because they liked animals. Some people were watching because they wanted to, they were like mesmerized by this guy's personality, and some people would just check because they were like, what's gonna happen? Like, something's gonna happen, right? He had a king cobra spit venom in his eye on camera. He almost got like taken out by this one 17-foot crocodile, like whipped its tail at him and almost took him out. And he's so interesting with this because he'll be like, the thing will try to kill him and then he'll just it won't slow him down. Like, there's one where he's holding the snake and it bites him on the arm. And he's like, okay, I'm just taking a bite, but I'm in no danger because there's no poison involved here. It's not a venomous snake. And he's like bleeding out of his arm. There's one where it bit him on the face and he's like bleeding out of his face. And he's like, this is, this snake, they've got a great strike radius. Like, they can really lunge at you if you're not careful.
Monty Python. It's just a flesh wound.
Yeah. Yeah. Like,
his arm is missing. It's just a flesh wound.
He was in Indonesia on Komodo Island, and there was some Komodo dragon that had gotten a fish hook lodged in its throat. And he was out there to like get the fish hook out of the Komodo dragon's throat. And the Komodo dragon's like extremely dangerous animal. Oh yeah. And he's going to go try to help it, and it starts chasing him. And he has to like climb a tree to get out of the way. Like, it's running after him, trying to bite him. And he's got to climb this tree. And the Komodo dragon starts climbing the tree behind him and is like chasing him up this tree. And he's running up the tree, and he's like, if this thing gets a bite of my calf muscle, like, that'll be the end of it for me. I'll go down, and then this thing will probably end up killing me. And the venom and the disease involved with the Komodo dragon's mouth is so great that there's no anti-venom for it, and I will just be dead if this thing bites me. And he's climbing up the tree, and the thing's chasing him, and he's narrating this on his like lav mic, like,
whoa.
Like, he says literally, the quote is, "This is a great demonstration of how dangerous they are." He's saying that while it's trying to kill it.
I mean, the Komodo dragon is a candidate for this podcast. I'll say that. That is one crazy beast.
Yes, I have written a Badass of the Week article about the Komodo dragon. It's awesome. They have a couple at the zoo by my house. It's amazing. Like, it's so cool. Just absolutely wild stuff, right? He gets knocked into the water all the time with alligator or crocodiles, right? Like, they tail whack him into the water, or he goes in the water on his own. There was one where he was like, this is like he's in the wilderness. These aren't like his pets. These aren't like the ones at his zoo. And even those try to kill him often. But he's like with wild animals, and he's like going into deeper water with them. Like, oh, look, here he is. Maybe we can get him to follow us. They say over, like, he was totally scarred up on his face. He said all of his fingers were broken. He's got scars on top of scars on his hands. He's got a python tooth that like broke off in his thumb, and you can feel it. Like, he had Conan like touch it. Like, hey, can you feel it? You feel the tooth in there. He broke a bunch of fingers and dislocated his wrist when a crocodile he was wrestling tried to go on a death spiral on him. He's been bit in the face and the leg, the arms, like all over the place. And he has all of these injuries and wounds, many of which were on camera as part of the show. And people, the question is, for a lot of people, like, why are you doing this? Right? Yeah. Including like other conservation people. Why are you doing this? You don't have to get that close to the animal. You could still be a exciting TV host without sticking your face next to the brown recluse. Yeah. Without sticking your face next to the brown recluse spider. Because he's doing these shows on like venomous snakes, venomous spiders, giant crocodiles, sharks. He's in the water with sharks. He caught a 14-foot tiger shark in a plastic bag because he needed to relocate it away from where people were hanging out.
All right.
Why are you doing this if you don't have to? And he has an interesting take on this. He's like, look, I'm not doing this as like some giant ego trip. He's like, I've got to get in the camera. I'm going to get my face as close as I can to these things. And I want to get this creature right into the middle of the camera, because he's like, there's a couple things here. Number one, if you're worried about me and you're watching because you think I'm going to die or whatever, like, I don't care. That means you're fixated on what I am saying. I'm saying to you that these are animals that live in the wilderness. They are wild creatures. They deserve to be wild. They need to be on their own. They need to have their own space to run around. They're amazing animals. We need to protect these things. We need to protect wildlife areas. We need to protect wildlife space. That's his message across the board. In any interview he ever gives, is like, my job is to, like, I've been put on this planet to, like, conserve wildlife and wildlife areas. And he's like, look, if you think I'm going to die, then that is, you're paying attention to what I'm saying. Right. And that's what I need. Yeah. And he's like, the other part of it is, he's like, I want to get you right up there next to this creature because I want you to form. He's like, if you watch it from a distance with somebody whispering about how majestic the creature is, he's like, that's not the same. He's like, I want you to see it right up close because that's going to draw a connection between you and this animal. And if I can connect you with this animal, you'll want to save it. You'll want to keep it around. You'll want to protect it. And so, I think that he has a good point, right?
A noble cause.
Yes, it's a noble cause. And yeah, he loved animals. He loved wildlife. And I mean, he literally, like, named his firstborn kid after his favorite crocodile. Like, he loved animals. And so he wants you to kind of go on that journey with him, right? He does the Super Croc episode where he catches like 33 monster-sized crocodiles in 14 days and puts trackers on them to like, track them to see where they're going and what they're doing, because you can't, like, follow these things around all the time. But as part of that, it's not just, some ego trip for him. It's, let's do research. Let's do some conservation stuff. Let's find out where these creatures live and how we can understand more about them. And he talks about the dangers of hunting and of poaching, and was really against all of that stuff. Obviously, don't eat shark fin soup, don't eat turtle soup, that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, that's Steve, and that was what he was super into. And it was, like you said, a noble cause. And it was one that really resonated with his audience too. And people really, fell in love with him and with the show. He opened up a bunch of, he did a lot of conservation work. He started the Steve Irwin Conservation Foundation. He had the Australia Zoo. He built a animal hospital on site at the zoo where he'd relocate animals. During brush fires in Australia, a lot of wounded animals are brought there and they're get taken care of. He also was really instrumental in doing a lot of awareness on what to do if you're an Australian and you're bitten by something venomous, which we talked about a lot on our
useful over there.
Yes. I mean, he does it kind of everywhere too, but, like, especially in Australia, he was really big on the education programs for that, because we had talked about it with some of our animals our creatures on the Australia episode. Like, if you get bit, it's nice to know what you're supposed to do and where you're supposed to go next, And yeah, that was him. Like, there's a great quote by him that I want to read here. He was on 60 Minutes Australia, and he says, "What good is a fast car, a flashy house, and a gold-plated dunny to me?" Dunny is what Australian people call a toilet, apparently. I had to look that up. Absolutely no good at all. I've been put on this planet to protect wildlife and wilderness areas, which in essence is going to help humanity. I want to have the purest oceans. I want to be able to drink water right out of the creek. I want to stop the hole in the ozone layer. I want to save the world. Money? Money's great. I can't get enough money. And you know what I'm going to do with it? I'm going to buy wilderness areas with it. Every single cent I get goes straight into conservation. And guess what? I don't give a rip whose money it is, mate. I'll use it and I'll spend it on buying land. And that's what he did. That was his life,
That is badass.
That is badass. Yeah. He does a million shows. He's got a bunch of different shows going on, a bunch of different networks. He travels to the Himalayas, Antarctica, South Africa, the US, South America, catching all kinds of animals and doing all kinds of great conservation work. There's also a couple stories where, like, he would just be traveling for work and, like, somebody would be in trouble with an alligator or crocodile and he would jump on it, come to their aid. There was a story where he was in Central America, he was in Mexico, and there were some divers that sent out a distress call because they banged into some rocks and they were having trouble. He and his crew, like, diverted to go save them. Like, he jumped in the water to, like, pull this diver out who was, like, barely conscious. And that's him. And so, okay. So in 2006, people had been kind of, like you said, being kind of he lived a pretty dangerous life. And on September 4th, 2006, he's off the coast of Queensland, filming something for Ocean's Deadliest, but it's not the Ocean's Deadliest thing that ends up injuring him fatally. It is a stingray of all things, a creature that is not particularly dangerous to humans. He is stabbed by a stingray's tail while taking footage of it, and he dies at the age of 44, which is kind of intense right now because that's the age I am currently. So,
like, what year is it at my 44? Almost January.
So I had to do the math too when I saw that. I was like, 44. I think I'm close to that.
Wow, it's only 44.
Yeah, 44 years old.
I mean, I remember when that happened, and I feel like, after hearing this story, it's even rethinking about it now. It's even more of a bummer. It's like deprived of, so young actually, and deprived of so much joy he, could have been continued to give us over the years.
I mean, he loved life, and he did an interview, and he was like, I wish I didn't have to sleep because it just feels like a waste of time. I want to just get out there and do more stuff. And and so that's Steve. He passes away in 2006. There's tributes all around the world for him. He earns all these honors and medals and all this stuff. I wrote a Badass of the Week about him right after it happened, and that has been one of the most viewed badasses I ever wrote. And at the time, it was the most I'd ever received requests for a certain character. Right? Like, I loved Crocodile Hunter. I never really talked about him on the blog or whatever, but like when he passed away, like within 2 days, I had hundreds of emails for people being like, you got to talk about this guy now that he's, and what he did. And I mean, there's an asteroid named after him. There's a whale conservation ship named after him. And one of the cool things is that his family is continuing his work, right? So his wife and kids, they still do TV shows for conservation work. His daughter got a daytime Emmy for her conservation show.
Not bad.
She won Dancing with the Stars, which I didn't know. She also, I learned, more intimately related to my life at the moment, is that she voices the zoo lady in Spidey and His Amazing Friends, which is the show that my son is obsessed with. So sometimes there's a zoo and there's a woman that works there, and that's Steve Irwin's voice. So now you know.
Great.
His son also does Fallon and brings animals onto the show. He's still working at the Australia Zoo. And that's Steve. And he really is a badass. And the thing that we kind of talk about with Badass of the Week is that it's I guess I was going to kind of reiterate the mantra of the show, but I think Steve actually says it word for word with this quote. He says, "I have a message for my fans. Whatever you want to do in this world, it is achievable. The most important thing that I've found that perhaps you could use is to be passionate and enthusiastic in the direction that you choose in life, and you'll be a winner." And that's kind of what badass is all about. And
it's the best kind of badass.
Yeah.
Steve Irwin is we need more Steves.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. He felt passionate about something. He went for it. He didn't let anything get in his way. He didn't let anything slow him down. And with him in particular, he left the world a better place, which is something. So
yeah.
So that's Steve Irwin, and that is our episode for today. We want to thank you guys so much, as always, for listening. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. Please do send us emails, and we love to read them. And please share with your friends if you guys enjoyed the show or are enjoying the show in general. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you on the next episode.
Stay badass.
Badass of the Week is produced by High Five Content. Executive producers are me, Ben Thompson, Dr. Patricia Larish, and Andrew Jacobs. Writing is by me and Pat. Story editing by Ian Jacobs. Mixing and music and sound design by Jude Brewer. Special thanks to Noel Brown at iHeartRadio. Badass of the Week is based on my website, badassoftheweek.com, where you can read all sorts of stories about other badasses. If you want to reach out with questions or ideas, you can email us at badasspodcast@badassoftheweek.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe, follow, listen, and tell your friends and tell your enemies. And please leave us a rating. We'll be back next week with another one.